Or good evening, everyone. My name is Gustavo Rivera. Welcome to the first in a series of town halls related to marijuana in New York State. Just for one second, I'm just going to say, para aquellas personas que hablen español, por favor sepan que si están en Zoom, solamente en Zoom, no en Facebook, pero en Zoom va a tener un botón que está abajo para poder interpretar en live, como quien dice, al mismo momento. O sea que dele a ese botón si quiere oír esta presentación en español. So again, welcome to everyone. This is the first in our Marijuana in New York virtual workshops. This is the licensing edition, and we're going to be doing a series of these, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the other ones that we're going to do. But thank you all for joining us today. I will say that this is today we're going to be talking about the various licenses that will be available for those folks who participate in the state's marijuana industry following the passage of the MRTA, or the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, or MRTA, or as they call it in the streets, it's MRTA. Just like that was my, if you're old enough, you understand that one. I hope that you are all well, that you are cool at home, that you're well with your family. Happy belated Pride, by the way. So as far as, I'll just want to say for 1 minute before we go to the actual presentation and talk about why this bill was so important. This bill was important because there were many of us who have for a long time believed that marijuana needed to be legalized. And the main reason for it, when we're thinking about how to legalize marijuana, for many folks, there have been all sorts of conversations about the type of revenue that it would actually create for the state. As far as I was concerned, and I'm thankful that so many of the advocates that fought for this, that was always secondary. At the cornerstone of this piece of legislation, which is why it is so important, because we're the first state to do it, and the best state to do it in this way, is at the core of it is a restorative justice model. It actually looks both at what happened before with folks who were criminalized because of use and sale of marijuana. It looks at how to provide opportunities for folks, including those folks who might have been involved in the illicit trade, and we're definitely going to talk a lot about that today. It creates and it actually sets aside some of the revenue that is going to be generated eventually, so that it actually goes back to the communities that were harmed by the drug war. And that is at the centerpiece of this bill, which is why I believe it was so important to pass. And I'm glad that we got it done this way. So the law creates two things. It creates something called the Cannabis Control Board and the Office of Cannabis Management. And these are the offices, the state agency that will oversee the adult use cannabis program, the existing medical cannabis program, which has existed for a few years in the state of New York, and also the existing cannabinoid hemp program. And this will allow for authorized sales to start next year on April 1st, 2022. There's a little snag, however. We just have to be honest about this. The governor, as part of the passage of the law, has to name and nominate, and we have to approve in the Senate, an executive director for the Office of Cannabis Management and a director of the Cannabis Control Board. And he has not done so yet. So we hope that he does this soon. And maybe our fine governor is watching at this moment. Certainly some of his folk are. Why don't you just send us we got some great ideas about some folks. And I know there's conversations that are happening. So hopefully that happens pretty soon, because unfortunately this might delay the legal sale of marijuana by an additional 6 months by some estimates, but we are hoping that that is not the case. The next event in this series will actually be about a Know Your Rights edition, and we're going to have to educate the community on the individual rights on the possession and consumption of marijuana as according to this bill. And you should contact our office, and I'm going to know that there's a page that's going to come up in a second, or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram for updates on this, and so you can make sure to participate in that next town hall. As you can see there, if you need to contact our office for this or any other issue, 718-933-2034, or you just email us at grivera@nysenate.gov. And I should tell you that we have been, well, you should also follow my office in all of these social media platforms. And I will tell you that we have remained off, my team has kept my office open virtually for this entire time, but I'm very happy to announce that very soon we will be reopening in, for real. Like, we will actually be having in-person conversations again. And so the constituent services, again, 718-933-2034. And make sure that you send us, you send us an email so that we put you on a list and you can be informed when the next town hall on this series and anything else that we do virtually, and very soon in person. We actually did our first in-person event this last weekend, and seeing my constituents again was actually in person was a really great thing. But anyway, so we're going to get right to it. What we're going to do today is we want to have a conversation, and after I pass it off to these two brilliant women, I will be stepping way back, particularly because they are experts in their field. And today what we want to do is help prepare entrepreneurs, business owners, and Bronxites, or folks from others, because I know there's folks from other parts of the city that are joining us that are interested in the marijuana industry. We want to make sure that we can answer all of their questions related to the licensing process, because as the bill was designed to help local economy and create opportunity for folks, particularly folks that before might have been harmed by the drug war, we want to make sure that you have all the information necessary so you can do just that. And to lead this conversation, we're going to have a joint presentation by two folks who I'm very proud and honored that they would join us today. First of all, Melissa Moore, who is the New York State Director for the Drug Policy Alliance. And the Drug Policy Alliance, or DPA, has been a great ally certainly in passing this bill. I will also underline the legalization of syringes that we just got done a couple of weeks ago in the last days of session. They were also one of the folks who has been a very big champion of that. And but Melissa has been working there at the Drug Policy Alliance and shift New York's approach to drug policy and to repair the harms that the war on drugs has caused to individuals and communities, which is why this bill was so important in their work. And I thank them for it. And we are also joined by Tanya Osborne. Tanya Osborne, who is one of those folks. I will tell you, I don't have an entrepreneurial mind. And every time that I meet one of these folks, I just kind of have to take my hat off to them, because you have somebody who was involved in the music industry, in financial services, and business coaching, and now in cannabis. She actually not only is the director of events and community engagement, as it says there on the slide, for Women Grow, and you see what they did with the logo. See what they did with the logo. But she also is the founder of Canadiva. That's right, Canadiva LLC, which is a brand committed to supporting women in a space for hosting events, to shining a spotlight on women entrepreneurs in the cannabis business. So both of these folks are very knowledgeable, and both of them are going to kind of walk us through what the bill does, how it does it, and then how to prepare you to make sure that you can help us when this program is established, to make sure that we get the benefits that they're supposed to get from it. So I will leave them to you. Ms. Moore and Ms. Osborne, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Senator, and thank you for hosting this incredible panel discussion right now, and for all of the work that you've done to get this bill over the finish line, the much needed marijuana justice initiative that we're going to be talking about tonight, and for your work around so many other drug policy issues, as you named, the syringe decriminalization that was a 10-year fight that nearly took us all out in the meantime, as well as so many other, really just health-based initiatives that New York is so badly in need of. So just thank you for your leadership, for the time and attention that you have put into all of these different issues. And now that we're getting things over the finish line, for your attention as well on the implementation. As you said, what we're looking at right now in New York State is the fact that the governor still needs to nominate some of these key leadership roles, and then go through the Senate confirmation process. So we're anxiously awaiting, as you said, those nominations to come down. But in the meantime, we can talk about everything else that is included in this bill, the changes that took effect immediately. I know you'll be delving into a lot more within the Know Your Rights event that's coming up in the future. I think folks can drop the link into both the Facebook Live as well as here on the Zoom, just in the meantime, so folks can have the quick explainer of what's in the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, just the top lines. And then, of course, there'll be a lot more conversation about all of those different provisions in the upcoming event. But for today, let me share my screen so we can dive in on the licensing piece in particular. So the crucial pieces here, and Tanya will be able to speak to this as well, is what we're going to be talking through, what's actually in this legislation, what does it mean, how can folks be part of this, what is the licensing process, at least as far as we know, going to look like, and then talk through questions that folks have. So in terms of what was in the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, this was a huge bill, hundreds of pages long. So don't expect that everybody has read it necessarily cover to cover. But what it establishes is that cannabis use, marijuana use is now legal for people 21 and over in New York State. The criminal penalties associated with possession of up to 3 ounces have been removed. Things have shifted to be criminal penalties for people who are under 21 years old, recognizing that we don't need to criminalize young people and have a record that can hang over their head for the rest of their lives. And the bill also dealt with a lot of the other impacts in people's lives from cannabis prohibition. So things that have blocked folks out from being able to access housing, being able to access employment, and child welfare, family regulation system implications as well. So we can delve into that a lot more in the future conversation. For this moment, the Office of Cannabis Management essentially exists as a website, the cannabis.ny.gov. We are awaiting, as we were talking about, the appointment of the executive director, and that'll really dictate the hiring of staff. And this new agency, the Office of Cannabis Management, will have purview, will have jurisdiction over the adult use program in New York, but also the medical marijuana program and the industrial hemp CBD farming program. It'll basically, all aspects of the cannabis plant will be regulated under this new agency. And the really crucial provisions, as the senator talked about, is having equity and justice at the center of this bill. So there were changes within the criminal legal system. We addressed a lot of the comprehensive impacts in other parts of people's lives, recognizing that we can't move forward in New York into a new era of marijuana justice without acknowledging the tremendous harm that has come before. We've seen decades and decades of racist enforcement of marijuana laws in New York. And as we're turning the page, we can't ignore that. We know that communities all across New York, and especially communities in the Bronx, were over-policed, were targeted systematically. And that led to issues that people have faced with their criminal records and how that's impacted their lives, but also economic impacts within the community. People have been blocked out from being able to get stable jobs moving forward. People have been blocked out from being able to access housing. And all of that takes a toll. So when there was a report released earlier this year that actually looked at the data around marijuana enforcement and racial disparities and economic vulnerability and the impact of COVID-19, what researchers found was the same neighborhoods, especially in the South Bronx, that were the most impacted by marijuana arrests were also the most impacted by COVID and had some of the highest economic vulnerability. And that's why it's really important, as we're talking about moving into a new phase of actually bringing this industry into a licensed space. We know it's a viable, thriving industry in New York that's worth $3 billion by a lot of estimates already. It's not as though we're going to flip a switch and suddenly create an industry that wasn't there before. So what we're talking about is really within this bill, there was an intentional effort by the sponsors, by other members like the senator who were really involved in this work throughout many, many years, to make sure that there would also be transition points for folks who are in the legacy market to be able to come into the regulated space. And also a lot of conversation about how to be very clear that this is not an excuse to continue to criminalize people who are operating within the legacy market, but rather to be able to provide bridge points for folks and an incubator program specifically for social equity applicants. So similar to what the senator was saying about really centering the people who have been the most impacted by prohibition, and having social equity priority licensing go to, and 50% of the licenses as a goal, going to people who themselves have been targeted for enforcement or from a community that's been disproportionately the target of enforcement. So really flipping it on its head from what we've seen even in other states, but certainly from what we've seen in New York, where previously people who had had contact with the criminal legal system because of marijuana were blocked out from getting professional licenses, were blocked out from different types of jobs. Not only will that not be the case anymore, but people are actually going to be prioritized within the social equity program. And there's an incubator component that is intended to be able to provide low and zero interest loans to social equity applicants or people who qualify under those parameters, and also legal counseling and technical assistance for people. So just really quickly, what you see on screen right here are the different types of licenses that are included in the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. And this is a broad overview. Really want to drive home the point that this is not only about a dispensary. This is not only about retail locations. There are a lot of other types of business opportunities as well as license opportunities. One of the really key things that passed through in New York that we have not seen in other states that was really crucial in New York is an on-site consumption license. So that's like a lounge. And that's something that's pretty unique to our structure here. And it was really vital because we have so many residents of public housing in New York. And because of federal prohibition, people would not be allowed to smoke on public housing property. And so we really wanted to be very clear to not set up a two-tier system where some people would have safe access, be able to consume at home, and other people wouldn't. Other New Yorkers would be blocked out from that. So having an on-site consumption license provides a space where people could actually go and consume, and it would be safe and sanctioned and ventilated in all the ways that it needs to, but it would really be that opportunity for people. And also a co-op license. And this is really important because New York actually has some of the most robust cooperative infrastructure in the whole country, and more participation from women of color, and from immigrants in our co-ops. And that's worker-owned cooperatives. So that can be everything from like a grocery store that people are kind of more familiar with, to a bakery, to something that's more like transportation based. Really anything could hypothetically be a worker-owned cooperative, and that could include a cannabis business now because of the co-op license, as well as delivery, and the micro business license. And the micro business is really crucial because that will allow somebody who might have been operating in the legacy space, who is already doing each of the pieces from production to processing to delivery, to actually still be able to do that and to have all of that encompassed under the micro business license. And right now I want to kick it over to Tanya, who is like an absolute expert in all of these different facets, who can also talk us through a little bit more of like what these different things mean, and also what things are like ancillary businesses, as we call them. So non-plant touching businesses that would also be encompassed.
Hey, everybody. I don't know if you could see me, but I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much, Senator, for having us. I just gave you a promotion. Look at that. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here. And I am born and raised in the Bronx, so I'm super, super honored to be here. So yes, I would love to really talk more about the licenses that are coming. A little background about me, because I did want to tell everyone kind of where I came from. The organization I work with is called Women Grow. We are a national organization that really educates, connects, inspires, supports women that are doing work in this industry, from business leaders to entrepreneurs, advocates, and the like. And what's really been fantastic is working with organizations like Drug Policy Alliance, now that we have, I remember when I first came into this industry in 2014, we did not have legalization, and we would go up to Albany every year to push for it, push for it, push for it. And now, so great, so happy that that we've got that. I will need your slide, Melissa. So I'm going to need you to bring back up that slide presentation. But from the slide that Melissa had up earlier was about the different licenses that we're going to have access to. And I just wanted to touch on them really briefly as far as production. So we're going to literally right now, the medical program is vertical. So that means it's in essence from seed to sale. So they kind of it's not vertical anymore. So each of those components are now available under the adult use. So production is simply growing, cultivation. Processing is if you're making edibles or you're doing extracts, that's processing. Testing means that you are actually the facility that tests for potency, et cetera, for cannabis products. On-site consumption, as Melissa specified, is going to be really one of those sweet spots that New York has that no one else does. And that is incredibly exciting, where you're basically allowed to consume on premise. Nurseries, if you have a green thumb and since we will have home grow in another year, nursery is the availability to purchase baby plants. And that's going to be wonderful when we do have home grow, which again, for the medical patients will happen first, and then we'll roll out to adult use folks soon thereafter. Retail is exactly what it is. Cannabis retail, i.e. dispensary, which, as Melissa said, is usually the go-to for people. It's like, I think I want to open a dispensary. We'll do a deeper dive into what that really means, but it is the retail establishment for selling cannabis products. Distributor and delivery are a little different, but kind of the same. As one is getting the cannabis from, let's say, the cultivator or the processor to the retailer, and delivery is getting it from the retailer to the consumer. So both of which are, transportation type, but one is to the consumer and one is to the retailer. And the micro business, I like to make the micro business akin to some of these small breweries where they actually do all the brewing on premise, and you have the opportunity to consume there, drink your beer there, or take it with you to go. They usually only sell their products. So think of it in that vein. And co-ops is going to be amazing. And I really implore everyone to do the research as to what a cooperative is. When I was there's a co-op here in New York, the Green Worker Cooperative, and I didn't understand what a co-op model was. And I'm a serial entrepreneur and never understood that. And when I did, I realized that that is the opportunity for a lot of people to really, with very little investment, be able to take advantage of the revenues and profits of an organization that you already work for. So it is pretty exciting to see that work. So as far as how it's going to look, or what is anticipating, is 50% of the applicants would be social equity applicants. How do you qualify as a social equity applicant? Is you're a member of a community that's been affected. And we can see based on data, those communities, and I'm sure that they'll outline once everything starts rolling what those communities are. But most of us know that most of the Bronx communities, I came from the Wakefield section of the Bronx, highly over-policed, especially when it comes to cannabis. Has a lower income than 80% of the median income, and has been convicted of a cannabis-related offense, or an immediate family member has had an offense that has affected you. And I'm sure that those are going to be more written out in more elaborate terms as we get closer, once the regulations start to come into play. what we're really looking at, what I'm really excited about is the incubation, the program support. New York is going to be a state rather, that people are going to come to for prior to legalization, for a state that did not only had a medical program and not a robust one, to be noted nationally as the largest consuming state. You know, New York is going to be the hotspot for people outside of New York to want to come in to. So we have to really stay close to the regulatory bodies to make sure that all of New York cannabis stays homegrown. But 50% of those licenses are going to go to social equity applicants. That will include counseling services, education, things to help businesses. I mean, being in business in general is difficult. Cannabis adds a whole other level of complications, from the way cannabis businesses are taxed, to the level of insurances that need to be had by cannabis businesses, and additional layers of protection for consumers and for those entrepreneurs themselves. There will be a need for support. And I'm really excited to see that is something that has been put in place. Melissa, anything you wanted to chime in? I know that your face is still there. So are you good with me so far? Because we could keep going if you want to just kick it over to the ancillary stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think, what you're saying, Tanya, about just, there being so many barriers, no matter what industry or what sector somebody is in, especially for entrepreneurs of color, and recognizing that that's even more the case within cannabis, as you were saying, that because of federal prohibition, there's still a lot of impacts on people being able to access small business loans, for example, other startup capital for their businesses. And that's one of the reasons why having the low and zero interest loans as part of the incubator program within this bill was so important, because that's been one of the challenges that we've seen in other states across the country that have tried to do different types of social equity programs. And, people, especially naysayers, will sort of point to that and say, well, it hasn't worked elsewhere, so what's the point of trying in New York? And I think, number one, the point is that there has been a disproportionate harm and damage done. And so it's inexcusable to just throw up our hands and say, oh, sorry, and just move on. So there has to be intention around that. But in New York in particular, because we've seen that in other states where people had a priority license or a social equity license, but no access to capital at all. And even before the pandemic, this was an issue, let alone now, where we've seen even more so, just challenges for folks being able to open businesses and keep them running within these conditions. And certainly the case in New York as well, that there was this real recognition that there needed to be not just a social equity program in terms of who would be prioritized, but actual resources paired with that. And then additional avenues that people can take as well, like you were highlighting, the cooperatives opportunities and, the conversations that can be had with, like, for example, green worker cooperatives, as you highlighted, that can really help folks delve into some of the different opportunities, whether it's a plant touching business or not. So now I'm going to kick it back to you, Tanya, okay, so you can help folks understand all the different types of businesses that exist.
Right. So the slide before, where we talked about the licenses that are going to be developed as we get the regulations drafted, those are what we call plant touching businesses. There is a whole other level of non-plant touching or ancillary businesses that I really want to not leave out because they're so important. I have an ancillary business. I do events, non-consumption events, educational events with the Canadiva and with Women Grow. We are considered a non-plant touching entity. And so as we get legalization and as these cannabis businesses are going to start to grow, no pun intended, there will be so many opportunities for folks that do not want to take that extra layer of being a plant touching business. So farms will need pesticides, fertilizers, nutrients, anything agricultural and equipment, gardening, greenhouse, water supplies, lighting, so on and so forth. Financial services, I'll just say 280E, you could Google it and know that if you have an accountant, they will need to know that. So financial services from accounting, tax services, health services, banking, please on the banking. We need banking. So as that starts stuff to open out with the MORE Act and all that great stuff and safe banking, I'm going to put advocates in that because we need people fighting for that stuff. As far as alternative currencies with crypto, security, medical suppliers, business support, this is the thing that I love the most. Advertising, accounting, graphic design, website design, education, that is going to be huge because we have a lot of, if you watch the debates as we got legalization, it was a lot of misinformation. And someone needs to fix that, you know, stigma repair, as I like to call it. Consulting, real estate is going to be big because where are you going to put these consumption places? Where are you going to have your farm located? Lobbyists, marketing, cleaning services. I have a good friend who was like, I want to get in the industry, and he does HVAC work. I'm like, well, that's all you have to say. Because if you have a consumption space, they're going to need proper ventilation. There you go. So I often in Women Grow, people will ask me, you know, I want to get into the industry. What should I do? And my first question is always, what do you do now? Because I promise you, I come from sales. It helped me tremendously being able to talk to people to support events via sponsors. The fact that I had a sales history, a sales background. So use your skills and transition them into cannabis. We have cannabis social workers that are doing a lot of work, especially with educating for parents like myself. And there's so many opportunities that I don't want everyone to get caught up into, I want to open up a dispensary when you work in accounting and you really could be the next best cannabis accountant or cannabis bookkeeper and help support some businesses like myself. What else? Oh, so our next slide, and Melissa, feel free to chime in if you see anything, if I'm missing anything. Okay, I guess I'm good, right? So
no, you're great. You're great.
Okay, cool. So as we kind of wrap everything up, because we do want to have some Q&A in there, what you should be doing today. Get your stuff together, get your ducks in order, as I like to say. If you have a business that you have in mind, get it ready, because the regulations aren't out yet. So we don't have anything really to base anything on versus the legislation. So if you have a business idea, get your business formed. But I also want to say, don't get caught up into things, because I know there's going to be a lot of people trying to take advantage of folks trying to get into this industry. So all I will say is please, please, please vet any organization that you align with. Please get proper legal representation. But yes, form your business. If you are a minority or women-owned business, get WMBE certified. Work with an attorney who actually has read the legislation and is understanding of what's to come. Everyone is going to want to, as an attorney, just slap cannabis before their name, and now they're a cannabis attorney. Please vet all of your folks and align yourself with folks that are doing it. Please follow Women Grow on social media. There are a lot of really viable M for MM that does a lot of education, Can-Inclusive that does a lot of awareness. Please just align yourself with people that have been doing this for a long, long time. Like Women Grow, we've been around since 2014, that are going to give you information and really are not trying to take advantage of folks. And then stay aligned with Senator Rivera, because he's going to, based on what we spoke with his staff, they have a lot of really wonderful programming that they have upcoming, and I hope to assist in any way that I can. So as far as the last slides, I'll just say preparation is attend all the informational events, get your licenses in order, decide what type of business you want to launch, plant touching or non-plant touching. You will need to start sourcing capital, even though there will be opportunities involved for zero and low interest loans. I, as a business owner, always know that you will need capital to run any business. So, and a loan is really not what you want all of your sourcing to come from. So if you have folks that want to invest in your business, it's time to start having those conversations and start realizing that building your team, who do you want on your team? A cannabis business is not one for the solopreneur. I promise you that. You will need a team of folks working with you, and ideally your team will have their strengths in things that are not yours, so that you could be a really powerhouse of a team. And I know they mentioned some challenges here, but you're going to need capital, you're going to need resources, you're going to need legal help. So get your ducks in the order now. Stay tuned to find out as these regulations get developed and as they assign an ED. There's a lot to wait for, but there's a lot to get ready for while we wait, if that makes sense.
And there's a lot of resources that are already out there. You know, when we're having the conversation about being able to transfer or have the sort of parallel skills from different sectors and different industries apply to cannabis businesses, there's a lot of training and workshops that already exist across New York City, across New York State, for small businesses, for specific types of businesses. So that's like, you know, the Fast Track New Ventures, the Business Outreach Center Network, BOSES, if you're upstate, SCORE. There's a lot of different entities already. And, you know, I know, especially for some of the entities in the city, like they're looking specifically at, you know, how can we support new cannabis ventures, especially from social equity qualified folks. So it's, you know, a state level effort, and also that can be bolstered at the local level too by additional resources. And, you know, as we're going to be moving forward into this next phase where hopefully there will actually be an executive director nominated and confirmed for the Office of Cannabis Management, what we keep talking about of the regulations, that's going to be, you know, a process through which there will actually be, you know, the real specific, like granular level details of, you know, how, like, what is the form that you use to apply for a license? What are the specific, you know, zip codes or neighborhoods that qualify as disproportionately impacted, which, you know, we have the data because it's not secret. You know, the police arrest records have been very clear as to where the disproportionate impact was, but also making sure that, you know, as there has been a lot of gentrification across the city in particular, that it's actually the people who lived in the impacted areas during the time in which they were the most impacted who are having access to that. And in the meantime, you know, folks can have the conversation with your community boards, with your neighbors, with the folks in the community, you know, through all sorts of different institutions and different structures. That's really important. You know, as Tanya was saying, just because we move forward into legalization doesn't magically flip a switch and erase all the stigma that exists. We're talking about decades of social programming, decades of really intentional misinformation. When we go back to the roots of prohibition in New York, it wasn't about the plant. It wasn't about the science. It wasn't about what the research showed. None of that was the basis for prohibition. It was about very specifically wanting to be able to target certain communities, and it was about wanting to be able to enforce separation of people in our society. It was a really clear effort as the jazz age was coming up, especially in New York, to keep young people of color and young white people from spending time in the same places and being able to have a hammer of the criminal justice system to come at people with. and excuses to be able to target people and justifications. And we saw that all the way through. And so that doesn't magically end. You know, bias policing doesn't magically end as we move forward into legalization. So we need to be having these conversations to be able to peel back those layers of stigma and be able to help folks understand what all of the different aspects of cannabis can actually look like. And I just really wanted to reinforce that because it's going to be so crucial as we're moving forward to have that education component as well as the business component that it'll be paired with. And that brings us just to the launch part really quickly, where we're bringing together a lot of the threads that we've been talking about. You know, you hypothetically, somebody who wants to be in the cannabis sector will have, you know, started off determining like what kind of business am I going to have, and then therefore what type of actual legal business entity would make sense to go along with that. Do I want to have a cooperative business, in which case I'm working with other folks and organizing together? Do I want to have an LLC or a partnership? And we won't have time necessarily within like this discussion tonight to get into all of the differences between those things, but that's where the training and the workshops around small business opportunities, you know, at the city level can be really, really helpful. And, you know, certainly point folks in that direction. And then, you know, the last bit is networking and being in conversation with other people who are in the space. You know, I can't emphasize that enough. This is not a moment for like a sort of dog eat dog, everybody's fighting with each other type of thing. This is a moment where it's a time when we can actually be learning from one another and sharing ideas, talking about what works, what doesn't work, and trying to figure this out together. So I would really encourage everybody to take a different point of departure and not see this as a competitive space. And Tanya, I'll kick it back over to you too, because you've been having these conversations with members of Women Grow and others for years. So tell folks what they need to know here.
So it's perfect because networking has literally built cannabis up until this point. And I think networking is what pushed us over the line for legalization because of the communities that we've built. Even without legalization, even without having a medical program, this is a very robust community of people who love the plant, love its benefits, are very upset about the criminalization and the stigma attached to it, and are really just wanting to work hard to find a place for themselves, make sure that the people are educated, and I'm excited for that. We host events regularly to really just build our community, and honestly, that's where you're going to get your most support. That's where you have the potential to find your next partner, your co-founder, people that will support your business, people that will refer your business to other folks. Up until this point, the community was pretty small, you know, compared to New York in the big picture. And I'm excited that more people want to come into this space. I welcome you, but yes, this is a really unique space. So get ready, put your seatbelts on because everything changes from one day to the next. And but the bottom line is the bottom line is I see this plant as medicine, and I hope that we all can build a community around it that supports one another.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Tanya, for that insight that you have from the years that you've been doing this work really deeply. And I just want to say, I've seen, you know, some questions in the chat around, you know, what's the dollar amount, like what's
we'll get to
actual, that. Yeah, exactly. So we're going to dive in on all of this stuff. Some of it is known, some of it is not known at this point because of the regulations that we have to get into. But now, yeah, I'll bring it back over to you, Senator.
Thank you, Melissa and Tanya. See what I told you, folks? I just basically had to just step back and let them kind of lay it out there. There is a lot to discuss, and I'm glad that we have plenty of time for questions and answers. But a couple of things off the top. Number one, because it's been asked quite a bit, there will be a recording of this on Facebook forever and ever, like the intertubes. unless the tubes die, there will be a recording of this on my Facebook page forever, so you can share it, skip right to an area. That's number one. Number two, the presentation will be available as a PDF. If you responded to, if you signed up for this town hall today, that means that we have your email, and we will then send you a PDF of the presentation, because I know that there was, the lettering was very small. The reason the lettering was so small, and this is something I want to like transition to, is that obviously the opportunities here are very, very diverse. It's not just one or two things that are available to people. And so there are many type of businesses, there are a few types of licenses, but many type of businesses, some of which, a lot of which don't even require the licenses that we're talking about, particularly because, as Tanya said, if you focus, there's a lot that Tanya said that was so freaking on the money. So I'm just going to underline some of the things that she said, and then we'll get to your questions. You should focus as an entrepreneur or a business owner on things that you already do well, because within this space, it is very likely that that thing that you do well, that you're very prepared for, is going to be needed. And so being able to educate yourself on how to market yourself, or how to connect with other people who are interested in this, who will need your services, is probably one of the best ways to go, which also leads to another point that was made by Tanya. And that is that a team effort is probably the best way to go here. I never really heard the word what is solopreneur? Is that what you said? Solopreneur. All right. So I hadn't heard of it. And as I stated earlier, I have the brain for this stuff. I have the brain for policy. I have the brain for, like, speaking in public, communicating in public. I do not have the entrepreneurial brain and head that certainly Tanya obviously has, and so many of you in the chat here have. So make sure that you get together as a team, right? That you look for other folks that you can help kind of do things better, and focus on the things that you know how to do. Also, remember that this I'm very glad that you said this as well. There will absolutely be people who will be trying to take advantage of folk. It is always, there's the knuckleheads are always going to be around, right? So we will always have people that will always try to take advantage of this situation, going like, hey, there's some quick money to be made. So, this is it. This is the market. So come on, come down this road, and we're going to make some easy money. And as probably any entrepreneur can tell you, certainly better than me, probably even the most incredibly successful entrepreneurs probably did not have an easy road getting there. So it is likely that you have to be particularly wary in this time when we're actually transitioning into this new thing. Oh, Melissa, yes.
Yeah, one quick point on the taking advantage and just like being really careful as folks are operating maybe in ways that are less than genuine around the expungement piece. I know we'll talk about it a lot more on the next session, but the bill that passed includes automatic free expungement. If somebody's coming up and saying, pay me XYZ to clear your record, do this, that, the other, somebody heard from somebody on the corner, if you do this thing, pay this person, that's not necessary. That is all going to happen automatically for free. There's nothing that people have to do separately. There's no cost associated with it. So if somebody's trying to get you to pay them money to expunge your record,
red flag. That's a red flag.
Red flag. The exception to that is for folks who have immigration considerations. There is a separate process that people have to go through because of federal level ICE maneuvering. Each person has to file an individual petition. There's also a lot of free support available for that. You also do not have to go pay a bunch of money for it. Talk to any public defender's office. Immigrant Defense Project also has a lot of resources. We'll drop it again in the chat. But just be really wary, folks. If people are trying to charge you for something, make sure that you have the information on the front end and don't get taken advantage of. Back to you, Senator.
Gotcha. Thank you. And as we transition to the questions, I will just point to you, Tanya. You did it with the logo, but Miss Janisha Farquharson, I think is the way it says. I would love to connect with other budding entrepreneurs. See what she did there? The puns are everywhere. All right. So the first question, we're going to get to as many questions as we can. The first one has been asked a couple of times, and you already kind of answered it, but I want to make sure that we state it for the record. It was by Esther Lelivre, and I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And there's a lot of questions from Esther. So is this bill really for people or BIPOC? If so, how many licenses will be allotted to people we're talking about Black, Indigenous, or people of color? And as we said already, there's an established goal of 50%, right? We referred to it earlier, right? The social equity, 50% social equity licenses. But I'm going to connect it actually to another question that was asked, and throw it to you folks, and throw it to you, Melissa, because there is some of the stuff, right? Some of the stuff that we know, some of the stuff we don't know, because there was a question that was asked about how exactly are we going to deal, how are we going to make sure that there's a social equity application, that the social equity applications, they're 50%. I'm going to join Esther's question with Nadine Figaro, who asks the following, says, how social equity application processing will be implemented in a manner that ensures compliance with the 50% rule noted earlier. For example, what happens if all the applications received during the first launch period are received from individuals who do not meet the social equity criteria? Will New York State place the non-social equity applicants on hold until a sufficient number of social equity applications are received? So give us, there's obviously a hypothetical, and there's some of the stuff that we might not know, but what do you say to that question?
Right. So that fantastic questions. And thank you for bringing them together because they're very much in conversation, I think. So in terms of the 50% goal for the licenses, the bill also established an actual position of a chief equity officer. And this is something that's also unique to New York. So this person will have a senior level leadership role within the Office of Cannabis Management and will be specifically tasked with overseeing and supervising the rollout of the social equity program. And so that makes sure, well, the intention is to make sure that the implementation is actually following what's intended in the statute and what's laid out in the law. And so what's in the MRTA or MRTA is the scaffolding, is the framework for what the social equity program should be. And we'll see more of the details developed, like we said, in terms of what, the specific license application form will look like, things of that nature, what the scoring process or the rubric will be. But we have these parameters right now. And so the actual job that this person will have as the chief equity officer will be keeping their eyes laser focused on both what's being set out in terms of what somebody has to do to apply and to qualify, but then also how that's being carried forward. How are we doing toward that goal of 50%, and what sort of balances or adjustments need to be made in order to ensure that the process is actually meeting the goal that's in the bill. Okay. So, to that end, I think it'll be sort of an iterative process, gotcha. But the way the bill is crafted is meant to have as much transparency as possible on that, because what we've seen in other states is that people try to be shady, right? Like especially some of the businesses in Massachusetts, we've seen examples where, one company will try to have like 12 shadow licenses and have like kind of puppet mastering that they're doing this and that.
And if I may add something, Melissa, because we need to make sure to get through some of these questions, right? But one of the things that I would like to add actually for both Nadine and Esther is that many of us who care deeply about making sure this is done right are going to be keeping our eye very close. It's a state agency. So we have oversight over them. And it means that we get to talk to them during budget season. We get to call them into our meetings during session. We get to have conversations with them. We get to push them. So that's one of the things that we're going to continue to be in touch with. All right, next question.
And the office will have to give regular reports to the legislature.
Which will be made public. So we want to make sure this is transparent. All right, next questions comes from Ryan Adams. Senor Adams, good to see you here, sir, virtually. Should entrepreneurs who want to get ready for legalization start LLCs now to establish credit and track record and such?
If it were me, I would. Okay. Absolutely. Because to get certified as a minority business through New York State, I believe you have to have a year in. So I would get started as soon as possible. And at that point, you could start taking all of the courses that Melissa had mentioned. In in my experience, and please clarify me if I'm wrong, at one point, the SBA wasn't cannabis friendly, but now with New York State being legal, I'm hoping that that changes. But Green Flower Media has some courses. Someone was asking me down there. Somebody mentioned the NCIA, they have courses as well. Definitely go through a reputable brand. But yes, if I would start doing all business formation now.
Okay.
That's right. And a lot of a lot of actual state institutions will also be providing cannabis curriculum moving forward. And so I would expect, we've seen some SUNY campuses already start to do that in terms of cultivation. But I think, across the spectrum, we're going to see a lot more, cannabis related educational opportunities from, community colleges through to like SUNY institutions as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. And one question, which I'm sure many folks have had, and I've seen different versions of it, is there a list of people that we can go to for helpful resources, or is there a list of training and workshops? And I think, first of all, certainly make sure to keep in contact with my office, because we send out emails all the time, and we're going to make sure that we continue to inform people. This is my office number again, 718-933-2034, but you see my email right there, which will be the way that we actually, if you send us an email there with a request, we'll make sure we put you in our list, and we will definitely be sending out resources all the time, because this is going to be a continuing effort. Also, I am sure that there will be more information and resources both by Women Grow or by the Drug Policy Alliance. So you can certainly connect with either of them. And by the way, I do think if it's any indication, if her insistence on getting questions asked and answered is any indication, Miss Esther Lalivre will definitely be a great partner for whomever's out there looking for something. Because homegirl is on it. She is on it, asking all sorts of questions. I'm actually going to get to a couple more that she is asking. Let me see here. So let's see, what kind of funding will the license applicant need to have already on hand to be able to apply for licenses in New York City? That's one of the ones that she asked.
I don't think we have clarity on that yet, but I'll say
one of the things that we don't know yet.
That's right. But part of what's included in the law is an intention for the process to be able to basically be accessible to folks who have been directly impacted by prohibition. So not just kind of setting out this like nice lofty goal of social equity, but actually stipulating that the process through which people would apply to be determined to be social equity applicants has to be accessible to people. You can't make it be a 500-page form only completed in such and such a way that people aren't going to be able to actually do. That would defeat the purpose. And so the goal, and again, this is going to be part of the purview of the chief equity officer and others within the state agency, will be actually making sure that not only is the process accessible and available to people, but that there's actually supports for going through that. And that's the incubator program that we were talking about before. It's, having the capital available, but it's also the technical assistance, the legal counsel, a lot of the other, small business sort of coaching that is supposed to be included within that.
Gotcha.
Absolutely.
Now there's actually, let's switch for a second to talk a little bit about hemp, because we haven't talked a lot about it, right? But it's still, this is going to, now that we're going to create these agencies, it's going to come underneath the agencies that are created. So Genevieve Carr asks, is this a good time for someone interested in hemp growing as a startup, or should I have an existing farm at this point? What is your sense on that one? And I know that there's a couple of hemp growers that are actually on this list as I scroll through.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, if it's something that you're interested in, definitely, this is, I think, the moment to be able to pursue it. There is a hemp licensing program already within New York State. There have been a lot of hurdles and a lot of challenges for folks within that, unfortunately. So I think a lot of existing hemp farmers and growers are looking to this regulatory process actually as a way to address many of the things that have been severely problematic for them under the existing program. So I'll give sort of that caveat, but I think this is a moment, if it's something that you're interested in, to be able to pursue it, I would definitely recommend there, getting in touch with like the New York State Hemp Grower and Processors Association, groups, again, going back to the networking, like being able to be part of a community.
I'm sorry, say the name of that organization again, and I'm going to write it out because I'm sure if people Google it, they can find it. Go ahead.
That's right. So there are a few organizations that do work with small farmers and growers across the state. One is the New York State Hemp Grower and Processors Association. There's also
Hemp Grower and I'm actually I don't type it quickly as some people. Hemp Grower and
Processors Association.
Processors.
I can drop the link in just a second. And then there's also
Google it. There, go ahead.
Definitely. There's New York State Small Pharma, which is also, an advocacy organization that works particularly with small farmers, that's focused on regenerative farming and farming that is really in keeping with trying to reduce climate change and a lot of other issues that people are facing. So those are just the two off the top of my head. There's definitely more. So again, as with so many of the things that we're talking about, really recommend getting connected up, because from them you'll be able to hear about, what are the challenges that people who are already in the space are facing, and not have to, learn the same lessons yourself. You'll be able to kind of start in with that knowledge already.
And co-ops is a great opportunity for farmers.
Definitely.
Co-ops.
Yeah.
Now to switch back to cannabis, and this is actually something that's important that people should know about. When we were negotiating this bill, one of the things that ultimately was in the final version is that counties can opt out of this, and don't know why they would, but this was some folks who were insisting that this needed to be in there. So, God bless America, negotiations netted this version. So the question, how long does a county have to opt out for cannabis in their county? And do you have to apply for a license only in the county that you live in?
So if I could just say one thing as far as the opt-out, understand that the opt-out is just for retail. So you can't opt out of your legal ability to carry, to hold cannabis, to grow in your home, they're opting out of retail. So there won't be any places in said counties to purchase cannabis, but that is the only opting out. And can they? Yes. And I think it's coming soon. Melissa would have that part, but I just wanted to just be clear that's because in another panel that we did, someone was like, well, what if I'm coming from the Bronx going to Long Island to a town that's opt out? Could I get arrested? That's not the case. You won't be able to purchase cannabis in that Long Island town, but you would certainly not, your legal standing is not compromised.
That's exactly right, Tanya. And that's super important for folks to know their rights on this, because individual municipalities can't basically override or supersede or preempt what is state law. So state law at that level within this bill removed the criminal penalties for people 21 and older of having up to 3 ounces of cannabis. There's nothing that a town can do that can preempt that. All it is talking about the establishment of actual retail locations. And the question about home grow, it's not established yet, but the personal possession at home for that will be up to 5 pounds that somebody can have of their own like personal cultivation. So there is that allowance as well.
And as somebody who is not, because I mean, just to the record, I have used and I have inhaled, not my cup of tea. I'm much more of a spirits type of guy. I have a rum right here, but 5 pounds seems like a lot. So I think that you should be fine with 5. Wanted to actually, and one thing to underline here, number one, as it relates to what your rights are going to be, again, make sure you stay in touch with us, because we'll have another town hall specifically dealing with Know Your Rights. But also, I would guess then that even though a county can opt out of dispensaries, right, of having retail, that does not mean, however, that, as we stated earlier, there's a level of expertise that you might have in all these other ancillary businesses that you can still perform within your county, even though that county might have opted out of being able to have sales there. Is that correct?
That's right. And just a quick point of clarification, it's actually at the municipal level. So it's like the town, city, or village that the opt-out would happen. there was like competing proposals between the governor's provision, between the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. And so one of the things that was different was within the bill that passed, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act that was led by the legislature, the provisions around opt-out were a little more, I guess, more closely delineated and better established in terms of having it be, it has to happen by the end of this year, by the end of 2021, if a municipality is going to opt out. And if they decide to do that and the residents of that area say no, like say, you know, the council president wants to opt out. And so, you know, makes a motion for that, that's approved. If the residents of that area, of that locality say, no, we actually want to have retail, there is an opportunity for a referendum vote to be able to say, no, we actually do want to have this. But yeah, it's at the localized level as opposed to at the county level. And that's because, you know, we see really vast differences in how different parts of the state want to handle this within the same counties as well. But nonetheless, yeah, to the point, if you happen to live in a county or in a municipality that does opt out, that's specifically for retail sales, and that doesn't stop you from being able to have, you know, like we were saying, starting an ancillary business, or, you know, doing other things that are related, or just your own personal consumption would still be allowed.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, to talk about that, then let's stick to that for a second as far as retail, right? So there's a lot of questions about retail. One of them, and by the way, for my staff, make sure that you include the person's name so I can make sure to thank them, because sometimes I can't find the person who actually wrote the question. In this case, I do. Olga Baez, thank you, Olga, for including it, for asking this question. If you're opening an on-site consumption, we also need a retailer license.
At this point, on-site consumption and retail can't live in the same space. So I think that's one of the things that they'll have to fix in regulation. But right now, retail and consumption can't live in the same space. Now, the possibility is to have that space a delivery venue, but right now, no.
You talked a little bit about this earlier, but talk about home cultivation. Miguel Vasquez asked, why can't we have home cultivation right now? And
So,
actually, I believe that he is incorrect. Or is he correct?
We do not, it's right now, and Melissa can clarify for me, right now, we do not. The regulations
Okay.
are not in, but
Right.
from what I've read, we will have 6 plants per adult, 3 mature, 3 not, for a total of 12 per household max. So if you got 5 adults, you can't have 30 plants. You can have maximum 12 plants, 6 of which mature, 6 of which are immature plants.
That's right. And the time frame on it is within 6 months. It'll be available for patients that are registered as part of the medical program. And then it's no later than a year from when the regulations are established and adult use sales begin within the state. So it's a little bit wonky, and we definitely encourage folks to continue to, you know, follow DPA, follow Women Grow, to be able to follow the senator's account, to be able to get these updates as we're hitting these different benchmarks, because I know it's a lot of different dates flying around. But this is something where, you know, it can help folks to be registered as a medical marijuana patient in the state, to be able to access that more swiftly.
Absolutely.
This is the way, by the way, it's on.
That was one thing I never thought we were going to get it all. So if we have to wait a year, I'm okay with it. I'm going to be honest with you. I never thought that we would get home grow ever. So that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I will tell you, there were many instances in which we didn't think we were going to get any of this stuff. But when the governor has other concerns on his mind, all of a sudden, we started to get a lot of these things done. Ultimately, by the way, I just want to say for the record, People Stokes, Assembly Member People Stokes, and Senator Liz Kruger, who are absolutely battling every second to make sure we got this thing right. And so I will definitely give it to both of them, and I salute them. And to actually just relate, there's a lot of questions that have to do with timeline. I will just tell everybody, as we stated at the beginning, one of the things that is kind of holding up this thing actually starting is the fact that the governor has not yet sent us nominations. Now, there have been conversations about different people, and in all honesty, some folks which have been floated are not acceptable, because we want to make sure, as Melissa was stating earlier, as far as the makeup of what this board needs to look like and how certain people have certain roles in it, we want to make sure that it's people who know how this industry works, but who understand New York, and who understand that at the center of this whole process, the social equity piece has to be at the center of it. If we do not, we work too hard to get it right, and we want to make sure that in its implementation, it does not get all messed up. So the governor sending us these nominations is key, because for the regulations to actually begin, the entity has to be operational. And for that, the people have to be appointed. So again, I will ask our fantastic visionary governor, come on, buddy. Your job, buddy. Just send us the nominations. Wanted to ask actually a question about banking, because I know that it was mentioned a little bit earlier, and I know that I've always been, I remember a couple years ago when I saw this this news piece. It was when it was just legalized, in one of these states in the Southwest or somewhere, where they were basically like special forces people, because since they don't have banking institutions, they can't bank, everything is done in cash. So they had there was like this, it was a scene out of a friggin' movie where they were transporting like millions of dollars in cash in the middle of the night, and it was like a full-on special forces group that was with them. So it's a little bit like, whoa, wait, how does this?
It was in LA, in California,
right?
Legalization, because they were moving all this money in like armored vehicles and stuff.
Mm-hmm. So the one that I saw wasn't in California, but still, it's obviously an issue that still exists because of the difference at the federal level and at the state level. So this is a message, a question from Stacy St. Louis. As a cannabis-based business, I'm having trouble with finding a banking institution that will allow me to open a business account. Any suggestions or best options, as federally insured banks have been a hard no?
Yeah, I would actually encourage you to check out credit unions. In states that have legal access, that's one of the things that we've seen is a definite growth in the number of credit unions that are making this service available to folks. I'll also put into the chat the link to be able to take action around moving legalization at the federal level. We know that the MORE Act passed through the House in the last Congress. That was absolutely groundbreaking to see a bill that would actually remove federal prohibition and have community reinvestment and expungement components at the national level actually move through the US House of Representatives. There was some damaging language that was introduced at the very end that would block out people who had been previously criminalized, that was added. That has been taken out for the reintroduction this year. So the MORE Act is back in the House. We've also heard Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer talking about how he's convening a special effort within the Senate to draft like their own corresponding legislation as well. He's working with Senator Booker and Senator Wyden on that. Senator Harris, now Vice President Harris, former Senator Harris, used to be the one to carry that bill in the Senate. So they're kind of like reworking what that is, but they're actually looking really closely at the provisions in the legalization bill in New York that passed. And we've actually had conversations with Senator Schumer, who was like, wow, this is incredible, because it was about cannabis, but it was also about so much more. And you were looking at all the ways in which people's lives have been upended and how so many other barriers have been put in front of people that we now have to be just as clear and just as intentional about removing. And so he was really looking to New York as sort of a model, as a case study. And in a lot of ways, the MORE Act, it's different in that it doesn't set up the market at the federal level, because that would be left to the states, but it does establish the need to repair the harms of prohibition and do things like expunging records and making sure that we're not in another situation where even currently, even with the tremendous number of states that have moved on legalization, cannabis is still one of the top the top arrests in this entire country, with extreme racial disparities. So the work isn't over, just we're obviously looking at implementation in New York, but we need to do this at the federal level too. And so with the banking provisions, that's included within the MORE Act, removing cannabis from the Schedule of Controlled Substances frees up a lot of additional latitude within the banking space, because not every transaction would then have to be flagged as a potential violating transaction. That's what's happened now. Entities that are banking can do the transactions, but they have to keep all of the deposited resources and funds totally separate. They have to file a FinCEN flag on every single transaction. So it gets really cumbersome, and a lot of institutions don't want to do that. But what we see is sort of credit unions and some smaller community banks recognize that this is actually a really important service to be able to provide to the community, and especially those that are prioritizing social equity are really willing to work with folks. And so we've seen this with some of the credit unions in Massachusetts, some in Colorado. It's definitely a growing field. So there are existing options. It is definitely a challenge though. And until we're able to really move things through at the federal level and do so in a way that's combined with the efforts for justice and for restitution with people. It's not enough to just move the banking piece at the federal level without repairing these other harms too. So that's where we're coming from, and really saying that the MORE Act is what we should be seeing move in Congress. So I'll drop that link where folks can plug in on that advocacy too.
Thank you. Tanya, anything you want to add here about the banking thing?
One tip for banking is, as one I have had to learn myself, is don't put the word canna in your business name.
Is that a fact, Canna Diva?
The Canna Diva has been kicked out of every possible bank. We are a non-plant touching entity, but the fact that we are the Canna Diva, they're like, no. So everywhere from Stripe to every bank listed in there, we were not able to do it. So
in other words, leave the creativity around cannabis or weed or budding entrepreneurs. Just leave that's create. It's nice, but leave it for the marketing.
Yeah.
Don't do it for the actual name of the company that you're gonna have to freaking bank with.
Exactly.
That's right. Have your LLC be like
Gotcha.
Yeah, LLC should be like real plain.
Real plain.
Gotcha.
Have your tagline be spicy. Your name, keep it plain.
Exactly. Yeah. Keep it plain, LLC. Somebody sign it up. All right, we got a couple more here. We got a bunch more, but let's say, okay, so let's talk about co-ops. What about the co-op business opportunity with the Bronx Co-op Organization? This is from Abdul Boynes.
Yeah, so the cooperatives license exists at the state level. That'll be available as people are looking at what their different entry points can be within this industry. What we were talking about, and I think Tanya mentioned them and me as well, is Green Worker Cooperatives, which is a nonprofit that's based in the Bronx. They do a lot of incubation for cooperatives in general, a ton of education around it. And they've had an incubator program that's actually incubated a couple of CBD-based businesses as people have been, working on getting their footing, getting into the space ahead of legalization. And they have a real interest in, understanding of the ways in which prohibition and enforcement and criminalization has impacted the community in the Bronx. And they're really looking ahead at, how can community members plug in and do so in a way that is cooperative based as we're establishing this new industry. So I know that, folks over there are really interested in being able to work with community members to be able to provide some of that coaching, that technical assistance. They have the incubator program that people can apply for. And I think, that's really the type of thing that's just a tremendous resource for folks. If people just want to learn more about cooperatives and cannabis cooperatives, you can check out the Democracy at Work Institute. I'll drop the link in the chat. They actually did a report earlier this year about New York legalization and the opportunities for cooperatives. So those are just awesome folks as a resource as well.
Really fantastic, yes.
And then the New York City Network of Worker Cooperatives, people call it NICNOC. They're another really great.
Not TikTok, but NICNOC.
Not TikTok,
not
although
knock,
they do dances too, I don't know. But they're another great resource. And also CUNY Law has a specific clinic on worker cooperatives. And, again, they've been able to provide from the students that are studying within that clinic, they've been able to actually help some folks be able to like file the paperwork that you need to establish a cooperative. So, it's right now, I know we're throwing out a lot of different things. There's a lot of kind of separate entities. I think the aim is for a lot of at least this information to be like codified and presented to folks through the Office of Cannabis Management. But in the meantime, those of us here and those of us in the space, we've been doing this advocacy for a long time, are happy to be a resource for folks.
Absolutely.
Okay. I have one, there's a couple here that we already answered. So let me actually just going to read them quickly, but we already answered them. So I'll refer to the answer first. From Melin Delgado. Hello, señorita. Good to see you virtually again. What are the age restrictions for having a dispensary? You must be 21 years old or older, if I'm not mistaken, right? And if you want to be a licensed dispensary, but you cannot employ anyone under the age of 18. Is that correct?
So
Okay. It must be 21 years old. I just want to make sure that I'm seeking.
Yes, 21 and older. Yes.
Good. Okay. I'm just saying, this bill, as you folks can see, right? This bill was a complicated, a very, very long, very complicated thing. And obviously these folks know what so I just want to make sure that I remember parts of it correctly. So 21 years old for Maylene, 21 year old or older, if you want to be a licensed dispensary, and you cannot employ anyone that is under 18. And also as it relates to what kind of funding, one second. What kind of funding will the license applicant, this is from Esther Lelivre. I hope that I'm pronouncing it, because it's a cool last name. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly and I'm not messing it up. But what kind of funding will the license applicant need to have already on hand to be able to apply for licenses in New York City? What aid is New York City or New York State's will give, well, it says New York State Senate, but I figure it's New York City or New York State, will give anyone that is starting in the cannabis business for the first time. This is the incubator program that you talked about. So obviously there's more information about that at both Women Grow and Dark Policy Alliance can give you. And a lot of this is that more details, obviously, once we have a friggin' executive director and somebody that, somebody at both agency, the control board, as well as the Office of Cannabis Management. Once we have those folks, then a lot of this stuff will become a little clearer. There was a question.
I will actually add one little piece on that that's different from other states where people have had to get a state license and then an additional license at the local level. And that's been really hard for folks. Like in Massachusetts, social equity applicants had to, in a lot of places, have a lease already if they were doing a retail location, and then from there apply. So that's a ton of resources that folks have had to have at the front, right? And so the goal is in New York, as we were talking about the provisions in the bill about making the process accessible to people, the vision is for that to not be a requirement up front, because we know that it's a huge barrier to people being able to move into the space. And so I think, there's an intention in the way that the scaffolding or the framework is set out in the bill is to avoid situations like that have been really challenging for social equity applicants in other states, and to not have, straight up requirements of, hundreds of millions of dollars that you put in or bonded or whatever, things like we saw within the medical program in New York that made it virtually impossible for actual New Yorkers to even be part of that medical program from the business owner's side of it. There's only one business that's actually owned and run by New Yorkers in the medical space. And so there's a real clear intention from the bill sponsors and from the legislature to not repeat those types of mistakes. And we don't want to create that sort of oligopoly again that can just shut people out.
Ooh, fancy word of the day, folks. Oligopoly. Oligopoly. And this is actually goes to answer the question that Felipe Mercedes had, which is, as far as having a location or for possible dispensary or consumption space, is there a time frame that you must have the location before applying and acquiring a license? So I believe that is not, that there's no requirement of an actual time period, et cetera, correct?
There isn't set out in the bill. That could be something that's in the regulations, but the goal again is to not have that be, it might be like, I have, this, my eye on this spot, this could work for my business plan. But again, that's not locked into the statute of the bill.
Gotcha. Jonathan Roberts asked a very interesting question. And actually this one, I do not know exactly how to tackle. Is there a finite number of businesses to even calculate the 50%? So there isn't, I figure, what do you think about that one?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. So the bill itself doesn't put a number on the businesses, and that's because we had to run it through the legislature, which, as folks saw, that took years and years and years. And so the goal within that was to provide the framework, and then have some things happen in the regulatory process so that there could be adjustments if necessary. So the understanding is that the Office of Cannabis Management will basically determine, based on the size of the market, this is roughly the number of licenses that will be on offer. That isn't set in stone. That's not determined, locked into the bill, but they'll most likely say, there will be, X number of licenses within this first round or whatever it may be. And then from there, that's where the goal of 50% can be determined. But really, really good question.
Yeah, because I was like, wait a minute, you're right. There's no, because we're gonna say like there's gonna be 100 businesses or 500. No, there's no such number. So we're just saying, and again, a lot of this has to do with oversight, and it has to, it is going to be. I mean, listen, folks, nothing is perfect, right? And an agency that is a state agency, there's a level of accountability and transparency because it is a public entity, right? That means that folks like myself can ask questions of it. As I stated earlier, we can send them letters, we can issue subpoenas if we need to. We can then, we can have them in our budget hearings, et cetera, et cetera. And since the purpose of the bill is to make sure that at the center of it, we actually have equity, that means that we will be paying close attention to this type of stuff. So that, the worst things happen when no one's looking. So we are going to be paying close attention. And I know these folks are going to be paying very close attention, because they'll be damned if they worked so many years to get the right bill passed and then have the thing kind of fall apart. Let me see. By the way, it's 7:27 now. So we are, technically we're going to be here until about 7:30, but we want to give we have enough questions to have many more, but this is what we'll do for folks. Since we want to make sure this is not an unending thing, we'll probably do about 10 more minutes of questions, and then we'll wrap up. But please know that any questions that we do not answer live, we will actually compile them and actually get back to you. So there's a lot of stuff here. Let me see what else we have. From Kenny Joseph. Actually, no, there was actually one question earlier from Ernest Acosta, or Acosto. It's Acosta or Acosto. Do you have to be a citizen to obtain a license, or is a green card sufficient? You answered this earlier, but I want to make sure that we underline it.
Yeah, this is really important. There's nothing in the bill that would block people who are green card holders, who are permanent residents, from being able to have their license. This is something that we've seen in other industries where there has actually been a proactive block on people that's been problematic. One really, really important caution, though, around cannabis: because of federal prohibition, ICE can still take measures against somebody, even if they're a green card holder, even if they're a lawful permanent resident. Because of federal prohibition, they can take enforcement action on somebody if you're a business holder, or if you're working in the space, or even if you have pictures on social media, or even if you talk about it. So it's, that's not to like fearmonger, but it's just to be really, really mindful and cautious for folks, because they are doing this. We've seen it happen over and over again. Cannabis is like the #4 reason in the country why people are deported or deemed inadmissible. It's still a major, major problem. So definitely, if you have immigration considerations, make sure that you are talking to people like the Immigrant Defense Project, people like the Bronx Defenders Immigration Practice. Get that really, really sound legal advice. And then I would say, just be very careful about what you put out publicly on social media, anywhere else, because ICE can use that back on folks, and it can be devastating. So don't give them the opportunity to do that.
Exactly. And it's like that's on all sorts of immigration issues. Just make sure you talk to someone who knows what they're talking about. Get legal representation. You can always call my office, and we can connect you with folks that know this stuff to make sure that you're on the right path. A quick one from Edward Borg, who says, why can't the governor be held to deadlines on these required decisions? Because it's the freaking governor. He's going to do the things when he's going to do them, and he's going to do them at his own time. Eesh, gets on my freaking nerves, but it is what it is until we impeach him. Moving on, there is a question here actually, which is actually very interesting. How would we get, as far as supplying, for example, if I order from California, would I be able to sell in New York State? And that is a no. I want to
That is a no.
make sure that is clear.
Federal
it's an anonymous
prohibition,
attendee.
No interstate.
So
no.
Anonymous attendee.
Do not do that. Red flag, sir or madam or non-binary person.
Do not do that. So make sure that that is not something that you do. I wanted to make sure to state that on the record. Don't do that. Don't do that. This is New York, New York, New York. Just New York produced, New York consumed, New York.
State.
New
So
York
someone
State.
said New York State is not just New York City. I co-sign that because I have a lot of relationships in upstate and Western New York. This is a wonderful New York State bill. And if I could just say one quick thing,
Please.
Senator, I know this is really exciting, and I am so excited to see this industry grow. I want to see more Bronxites. Only thing I want to say is please do your own individual research. If you've never been in business before, research what being in business is. It really, cannabis is just like I said, going to add an additional layer. But if you've never opened a retail establishment, Google is your friend. YouTube is your friend to find out what those costs are assigned. What is it going to look like to have these types of entities? It's really going to be important to learn business and then learn cannabis, and it's gonna and kind of have to do them at the same time and in a rush. So please learn, connect with educators, connect with business leaders, learn the business of being in business, so that when you add the layer of cannabis on top of that, it's not going to throw you out of business.
And I would say that unless you are a professional cannabis user, do not put a plan together while on cannabis. I would suggest that you kind of separate those two out, but hey, maybe you get creative in it. You do your thing. Let's do a couple more and then we will wrap up. And let's actually end on this note on folks who are, particularly folks who have records before, right? Folks who might have been involved in the illicit trade. Let's actually end on a couple of those questions. From Kenny Joseph, can someone who has a small possession charge own a dispensary?
Yes, and I'm really enthusiastic to say that, because what we saw in some of the first states to legalize cannabis, like Colorado and Washington, was they actually blocked people who had prior records for cannabis, who ostensibly are the experts in the space. They blocked people out. What we saw in some of the middle efforts around legalization was just kind of like nothing. And then what we're seeing in New York and in some of the other states that have legalized more recently, like my colleagues out in New Mexico, is that specifically within the social equity program, it's people who have been criminalized in the past for cannabis are actually prioritized within the process. So not only, yes, you can own a business, you can, apply and be able to get your license like anybody else, but actually, in fact, you're prioritized within that. And that's so crucial, because in New York, the scope of harm from the marijuana arrest crusade was massive. There was 800,000 arrests during the last 20 years when supposedly there was decriminalization. So when we're talking about moving forward out of that, it's definitely not enough for, the powers that be in New York to kind of wipe their hands and say, okay, our bad, like now we're going to do differently. No, there has to actually be restitution for that. And part of that restitution is being able to make sure that folks who have been targeted in the past, disproportionately Black and Latinx New Yorkers, are prioritized moving forward. And then that's part of the community reinvestment piece as well. I know this wasn't the question, but not every single one of those 800,000 arrests is going to be somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur in the space. That's not feasible for a lot of folks, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't harm that was done in their lives. That doesn't mean there wasn't harm in their neighborhood. And so that's where the community reinvestment, where 40% of the tax revenue that's going to come into the state, that's millions and millions of dollars in perpetuity, is going to be available for grants, for community-based efforts that are responsive to the types of harms. It could be job training programs. It could be youth after school programs. It could be whatever is a need within the community that's arisen because of all of the criminalization of cannabis in the past.
All right. Got two more quickly ones, which are related to the same thing, and then we're going to wrap up. How many arrests are needed to qualify as a targeted individual? This comes from Elias Genovese. Go ahead.
One, any criminalization qualify.
One. And last one, and again, for those folks, this will be available one more time. It will be available as a recorded session on Facebook forever and ever and ever. You will have access to the PDF of the presentation that these amazing women gave, and questions that were not answered live will be answered. We will get responses back to you. But there was a last one here that I want to talk about, which was the OC. Okay, whomever that is, Jonathan Tanner. Jonathan Tanner can get screwed. Jonathan Tanner can get kicked because they're putting something on the chat, which is not very nice. Jonathan Tanner can get kicked out. All right. Hold on. Yeah, you can just kick him. Just kick him. Yeah. So Tanners get kicked. We will leave you be out. Okay, now the last question here, because this is actually related to what we were talking about. If somebody moves, this is one about somebody moving, because if somebody will a social equity participant still be eligible if they move from the Bronx to a rural part of New York to farm?
Yeah, they should be, because if they have that documentation to be able to show that they're from a disproportionately impacted community. Again, we're waiting on the regulations for the actual step-by-step process of what those qualifications and the paperwork involved will actually look like. But that's the framework that's in the bill, is if you are somebody who's from an impacted community, you would be able to move forward as a social equity applicant.
There you go. So folks, as we wrap up here, I want to give a huge thanks to every single person who attended, except that jerk Tanner, who we kicked. And I know that Lynette Redmond, Cyan Foss, and Robert Sequeira, you have your hands up. I just saw that. So I'm sorry that we might have answered some of your questions, but know that, again, this will, and in Flores Cueva as well, we're not going to get to that right now. We're not going to have time, but make sure that this is a recording. This recording will be available to forever and ever. The PDF will be available to you. And it is likely that based on this, we might have to do a part two. We might have to do a part two, because these two amazing women, Melissa Moore from the Drug Policy Alliance and the Canna Diva herself, Tanya Osborne, both regaled us with much information. And I want to also thank Juan Carlos Castañeda and Maria Casas, who were the two wonderful folks who, if you do not speak Spanish, you have not heard their voices, but their mellifluous tones filled the ears of those folks who are Spanish speakers. And certainly thank my team, particularly LaTanya Christian, for helping us put this together, as well as Caitlin Best, my Director of Community Affairs, Carlos Munoz, my Special Assistant, and Rachel Ferrari, my Deputy Chief of Staff. Folks, thank you so much for all this information that we got today. And I am very much looking forward to put the screen right there. Constituent Services, if you need me or my office for anything, 718-933-2034. Remember again that there will very soon be one about knowing your rights, and we might actually do a part two of this presentation. And last but not least, make sure that you take care of yourself and please stay cool. The last thing I will say is that, Melissa was saying earlier that it's so hot today that it's like you're in a rotisserie. So it's basically you're turning because it's so friggin' hot. I told you I was going to do the bit at one point or another. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a very good night. Thank you so much for attending this evening. Take care of each other and of yourselves. Take care.
Thank you.